I never imagined that after more than 2 decades together, my marriage would end because of a lie. Not my lie, hers. The strange part is that by the time she realized what she had lost, I had already made my decision. I was gone. The only thing I left behind was a small gift box on our bed. Inside, divorce papers. But to understand why I did that, we need to go back to the beginning. For privacy reasons, every name in this story has been changed. My wife and I met in high school. We were both 17. She wasn't just my first girlfriend. She was my first love. After college, we got married, built a home together, and eventually welcomed 2 amazing sons into the world. For 23 years, she was the only woman I had ever loved. I worked overtime, sacrificed weekends, and poured everything I had into giving my family the life we had always dreamed about. Like every marriage, ours wasn't perfect. We argued, we struggled. Life threw plenty of challenges our way, but every time we found a way through them together. At least, that's what I believed. Everything changed in late 2019. I suffered a serious knee injury at work that required surgery. Recovery was slow, painful. For months I couldn't walk normally. Simple household tasks became almost impossible. I hated depending on other people. My sons helped whenever they could, but many responsibilities ended up falling on my wife. She wasn't happy about it. Looking back now, I think that's when the distance between us quietly began to grow. At first, it was almost impossible to notice. Then little things started changing. She stopped hugging me for no reason. The goodnight kisses disappeared. Conversations became shorter, colder. Her phone never left her hand. That alone wasn't suspicious. She had always enjoyed scrolling through social media, showing me funny videos, recipes, or decorating ideas. But suddenly, she stopped sharing anything. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd lock her screen. If I asked who she was texting, she'd answer with one-word replies. Nobody. Just work. Nothing important. I wanted to believe her. After 23 years together, why wouldn't I? Trust isn't something you question overnight. Then the pandemic arrived. New York shut down. Our jobs were considered essential, so we both continued working while most people stayed home. I had finally been cleared to return to work after months of rehabilitation. It felt good to have a purpose again, but only a couple of weeks later, something else changed. My wife started coming home late. At first she said work was busy. Then it became every night, not 30 minutes late, not an hour. Sometimes 3, even 4 hours after her shift had ended. She'd walk through the front door, barely say hello, go straight to the shower, spend a few minutes with me and our younger son, then head to bed. When my knee improved, we tried rebuilding our intimacy. Physically, she was there. Emotionally, she wasn't. It felt like she was somewhere else, like she was pretending. That's when the questions finally started creeping into my mind. Was I imagining things? Or was my marriage quietly falling apart right in front of me? I didn't want to believe the answer, but once that question enters your head, you can't make it disappear, and without realizing it, I had already begun looking for the truth. For weeks, I kept telling myself I was overthinking everything. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe work really had become more demanding. Maybe I was letting my injury affect my judgment. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. One evening, while she was in the shower, I found myself scrolling through her public social media profiles. Nothing looked unusual at first. Pictures with co-workers, group dinners, weekend gatherings, smiling faces, normal life. Then one detail kept appearing over and over again. The same man, different places, different dates, always standing just a little too close. Sometimes his hand rested lightly on her shoulder, other times around her waist, close enough that most people wouldn't question it, but close enough to make a husband wonder. I clicked on his profile. Nothing. I had been blocked. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Why would a man I'd never met block me before we'd ever spoken? It wasn't proof, but it certainly wasn't normal. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Instead, I started looking for answers. I checked old photos, compared dates, read comments, tried connecting small details that had never seemed important before. The more I searched, the less comfortable I felt. Eventually, I remembered that we shared a family phone plan. I wasn't looking to invade anyone's privacy. I just wanted to know if I was losing my mind. When I reviewed the call history, one number immediately stood out. Besides mine, it was the number she contacted more than anyone else, every single week, sometimes several times a day. I searched the number online. It belonged to him. Now I had a name, a face, and a growing feeling that everything I feared was real. Still, phone records weren't enough. There were no messages, no photos, nothing that could answer the only question that mattered. Was she really having an affair, or was I building a nightmare inside my own head? I confided in my best friend. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me and asked, Have you confronted her? I shook my head. No, not until I know the truth. He agreed. If you're wrong, he said, you'll destroy your marriage. But if you're right, you deserve to know everything. Those words stayed with me. From that day on, I stopped looking for reassurance. I started looking for facts. Every evening, I quietly paid attention. What time she came home, how she behaved, whether her stories matched reality. The distance between us kept growing. She laughed less, avoided eye contact. Our conversations became mechanical, almost rehearsed. It felt like we were roommates pretending to be husband and wife. Then, everything changed. A few days later, I uncovered something I couldn't explain away, something that turned suspicion into certainty. And once I saw it, there was no going back. I wish I could tell you I found a single piece of evidence that explained everything. I didn't. It happened slowly, one clue after another, each one making it harder to deny what was right in front of me. Every night, after she went to sleep, I'd sit alone in my home office. I'd compare timelines, phone records, social media posts, work schedules, every tiny detail. Eventually, the puzzle started coming together. The late nights at work, the sudden secrecy, the missing affection. None of it was random. It all pointed in the same direction. Then one evening, I found what I'd been searching for. It wasn't just another suspicious detail. It was confirmation. There was another man. Reading those conversations felt like someone had punched me in the chest. They weren't talking like coworkers. They weren't talking like friends. They were talking like two people building a life behind someone else's back. Future plans, private jokes, romantic messages. Everything I'd spent months trying not to believe was real. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Part of me wanted to storm into our bedroom and wake her up, to demand answers, to scream, to end everything right there. But another part of me, the calmer part, stopped me. Confronting her immediately wouldn't change what she'd already done. If anything, it would only give her time to hide the truth. So instead, I closed the laptop, walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat there in complete silence. That was the night my marriage truly ended. Not the day we signed divorce papers, not the day I moved out, not the day everyone found out. It ended that night, when I realized the woman I trusted more than anyone had been living a completely different life. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I kissed her goodbye before work, asked how her day was going, smiled. She smiled back, looking into my eyes, knowing exactly what she was hiding. That hurt more than the affair itself. The lies had become effortless, and that scared me. Over the following weeks, something inside me changed. The sadness slowly disappeared. It was replaced by something colder, something far more dangerous: determination. I wasn't interested in revenge fueled by anger. Anger burns out. I wanted control. I wanted every decision I made from that moment forward to be deliberate, careful, calculated. If my marriage was truly over, I wasn't going to let emotions decide how it ended. I started organizing everything, every screenshot, every timeline, every conversation, every inconsistency. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I refused to let anyone rewrite the story later. If this ever reached a courtroom, facts would speak louder than emotions. Meanwhile, I made subtle changes to my own routine. I'd stay out a little later after work, spend more time with friends, keep my phone with me, change a few habits she'd grown used to over the years. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make her notice. Slowly, the roles began to reverse. The woman who had spent months lying to me started wondering if I was the one keeping secrets. And for the first time in a very long time, she looked nervous. She started asking questions. Where had I been? Who was I talking to? Why was I smiling at my phone? I answered every question calmly, never defensive, never angry, just vague enough to leave her wondering. The uncertainty was eating her alive. She had no idea that while she was trying to figure me out, I was already planning my exit, not just from the marriage, but from the life we'd built together. And by the time she finally realized what was happening, it would already be too late. By the time autumn arrived, everything had changed. Not on the outside. From anyone else's perspective, we were still an ordinary married couple. We went to family dinners, paid bills, talked about groceries, smiled in front of other people. But inside our home, We were living two completely different realities. She thought she was hiding an affair. I was quietly preparing to leave forever. The strange thing was that she had started acting differently. Almost overnight. She became unusually affectionate. She'd hug me without warning, ask about my day, offer to cook my favorite meals. At first, I couldn't understand why. Then I realized something. She was scared. The small changes I'd made to my routine had worked better than I ever expected. Coming home later, spending more time with friends, keeping my phone close, never explaining too much. She had started wondering if I had met someone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person who had spent months betraying my trust was now terrified of being betrayed herself. One evening, she finally brought it up. We were sitting in the living room when she looked at me and quietly asked, "Are you happy?" It seemed like such a simple question, but I knew what she was really asking. She wanted to know if there was another woman, if I'd stopped loving her, if she was losing control of the situation. I looked at her for a moment before answering. "I've just been thinking a lot lately." That was all I said. No accusations, no explanations. Just enough to leave the question hanging in the air. For the first time in months. She had no idea what I was thinking. That uncertainty followed her everywhere. She started texting me more often during the day, calling just to ask when I'd be home, checking whether I'd eaten dinner, watching my reactions whenever my phone buzzed. The more nervous she became, the calmer I felt. I wasn't playing games anymore. I was simply watching the consequences unfold. Meanwhile, my real work continued behind the scenes. I met with a divorce attorney. We discussed my options, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to make sure everything was handled legally and fairly. Every document was organized. Every financial record was updated. Every important conversation was written down. If the day came when I had to explain everything, I wanted facts, not emotions. At the same time, I quietly started preparing for a new life. I opened separate accounts, looked at apartments, made lists of the things I'd eventually need to move. Each small step made the future feel more real. There was no turning back now. The marriage I thought I'd have for the rest of my life already belonged to the past. She still believed she had time to fix everything. I already knew she didn't. Then something happened that confirmed just how desperate she had become. A few weeks later, she admitted she'd been worried that I might be seeing someone else. She tried to laugh it off, tried to make it sound like a joke, but I could hear the fear in her voice. I simply smiled, not because I enjoyed seeing her suffer, but because I finally understood something. She wasn't afraid of losing our marriage. She was afraid of losing the certainty that I'd always be there. And those are two very different things. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in my office once again. The apartment was silent. I looked at the growing stack of folders on my desk, evidence, legal documents, plans. Every page represented another step toward the end. I closed the final folder, took a deep breath, and realized the hardest part was no longer discovering the truth. The hardest part would be deciding exactly how to walk away. By early December, every piece was in place. The paperwork was finished. The apartment lease had been signed. My finances were separated. Every important document had been backed up. There was nothing left to prepare. Only one thing remained: walking away. Oddly enough, the weeks leading up to Christmas were the calmest we'd had in months. She became kinder, warmer, more attentive than she'd been in a very long time. She laughed at my jokes, asked me to watch movies with her, even reached for my hand while we were sitting on the couch. To anyone watching from the outside, it probably looked like our marriage was finally healing, but it wasn't. She was trying to save something that had already died, and I had accepted that long before she did. Thanksgiving came and went. Our family gathered for dinner. The kids smiled. Everyone laughed. For a few hours, it almost felt like the old days. I even hugged her, kissed her on the cheek, wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Not because my feelings had returned, but because I didn't want our sons to suspect what was about to happen. That evening, on the drive home, she looked at me with hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I feel like we're finally getting back to normal." I simply smiled. I didn't have the heart to tell her. There was no normal left to return to. Over the next few days, I quietly packed the last of my belongings. Nothing obvious, Just enough that I could leave without coming back. I bought a new phone, changed my number, shared it only with the people I trusted most. My sons, my closest friends, my sister, my attorney. Everyone else would have to wait. Then Christmas Eve arrived. She came home from work exactly as she always did. She took a shower. We watched television together, talked about holiday plans. She had absolutely no idea that this would be our final night under the same roof. She went to sleep believing tomorrow would be Christmas morning. For me, it was the beginning of a completely different life. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I quietly got out of bed. I carried the final folder into the bedroom. Inside it were the divorce papers. I wrapped it like a Christmas present, placed it carefully on my side of the bed. On top, I left a short note, "Merry Christmas." Next to the gift, I placed my old phone and my attorney's business card. No explanations, no goodbye letter, no dramatic speech. Everything that needed to be said was already inside that box. I picked up my 2 backpacks, walked through the house one last time. Every room held memories, birthdays, family dinners, Christmas mornings, school projects, late-night conversations, 23 years of my life. I stood at the front door for a few seconds, took one final look behind me, then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I simply disappeared. By the time she woke up, I was already gone. No phone calls, no messages, no forwarding address. Only a wrapped gift waiting on the bed. Later that morning, I imagined exactly how it must have unfolded. She probably smiled when she saw the present. Maybe she thought it was a surprise. Maybe she even believed it was a sign that everything would be okay again. Then she opened it. The smile disappeared. Inside were the divorce papers, my attorney's contact information, and the undeniable truth. Our marriage was over. Within hours, my phone began filling with missed calls, messages, emails, voicemails. She tried everything to reach me, but every path led to silence. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. She was, and there was nothing left for me to say. The first few days after I left were strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, there were no lies, no pretending, no wondering what was happening behind my back. Just silence. I moved into my small apartment and slowly began turning it into a home. It wasn't nearly as large as the house I'd left behind, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture I unpacked reminded me that I had finally taken back control of my life. My sons knew where I was. They visited often. Neither of them tried to convince me to go back. They had seen enough to understand that some things simply couldn't be repaired. Meanwhile, my attorney handled the legal process. Most of the communication went through him. That was exactly how I wanted it. I had no interest in arguing, no interest in blaming anyone. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. Eventually, we met to finalize the separation. It was the first time we'd seen each other since Christmas. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. She apologized. More than once. She admitted she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She said she never imagined losing me, that she thought we would somehow find our way back. I listened quietly. Then I answered as honestly as I could. I forgave you a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't always mean a relationship can survive. She started crying. I didn't. The tears had already left me months earlier. The truth was simple. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just couldn't go back to being the man I had been before everything happened. Trust had been broken. And some things can't be rebuilt. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. Walking out of the courthouse didn't feel like winning. It didn't feel like losing either. It felt like closing the final chapter of a life that no longer belonged to me. For the first time in years, the future was completely uncertain. And strangely, that felt exciting. I spent more time with my sons, focused on my health, returned to the gym, started rebuilding the routines I'd abandoned during one of the hardest periods of my life. Little by little, life became normal again, not the old normal, a better one built on honesty, one built on peace. Looking back now, people often ask whether I regret the way everything ended. The answer is no, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted anyone to suffer, but because staying would have meant betraying myself. Sometimes the hardest decision you'll ever make is walking away from someone you once believed you'd love forever. If there's one lesson I learned from all of this, it's that trust is the foundation of every relationship. Without it, love slowly disappears, and once it's gone, no apology can bring it back. So if you're watching this and you're going through something similar, remember this. Don't ignore the truth just because it's painful. Face it, learn from it, and never be afraid to choose your own peace over someone else's lies. Sometimes the ending of one story is the beginning of a much better one.